This is the Ready for Takeoff podcast, episode 192. My name is George Nolly, and today we're talking to Gregory Poole. But first, let me tell you about our sponsor, the Hamfist Novel Series. If you like aviation combat action inspired by real events, I know you're going to really enjoy the Hamfist Novel Series, and you can get the first book totally free. Just look in our show notes and you'll see how to do that. But right now, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for takeoff. I'm talking today to Gregory Poole, a former Coast Guard flight engineer, and he's now currently a martial artist. He's an expert black belt in Eskrima, Kali, Taekwondo, Goju-Ryu Karate, that's one that I recognize, Jeet Jundo, and Chien Na. Wow, there's a whole lot going on there, Greg. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. So tell us how you got your start in aviation.
I got my start in aviation in the Coast Guard. Basically, I went into school, Elizabeth City, North Carolina, did my training there. And from there, I was with C-130s when I was in North Carolina. Went on a couple flights there, training for my school, my aviation school, flight engineer school. Got in my duty station in Los Angeles, beautiful Los Angeles, Southern California. I was so excited to go there. When I got there, I had to take some tests or, take some protocols or, to get my wings. I was really excited to get my wings. I remember when I was 17, 18 years old, I saw a poster of a Coast Guard, and I saw a guy sitting outside the helicopter, and I told myself, I'm going to do that one day. So that's why I aspired to that's what inspired me to, get my wings. And my dad, he was in the Army, and he wanted me to go to Ranger School because he went through it. But I said, Dad, I want to fly, so I want to get my wings. So that's what inspired me to get my wings.
That's very neat. Now, how come you chose the Coast Guard rather than, say, the Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, whatever?
It's a small operation, and to be honest with you, the duty stations were close to home. So that's why I selected the Coast Guard. I knew it would be close to home.
That's as good a reason as any. Now, tell us about flight engineer training. How about your first flight?
My first flight was an actual SAR call. I was after I got my wings, I was all excited to get my first call, and this one's going to be real funny. My first call was actually to go out and go see an oil slick. That was it. So that kind of broke the ice for me. The lieutenant who I flew with, it was just me and him. We went out, and that was my very first call. So we broke the ice that way, and we just went out. We saw this little oil slick, and then we came back. I have a couple more that are really, really good ones. So that was my first one, broke the ice. My second one I'll give you is in California, they have these cliffs, and we did one rescue where we came in on a cliff where somebody drove their car off. So we had to go rescue them at the bottom of the cliff. So we came in, and the rotor blades were about very close to the cliff. I'll just say that. I won't say exactly how close it was, but it was very close. The pilots that I flew with in the Coast Guard were extreme professionals. So we all worked together as a team. We dropped the basket down to pick this person up that fell off the cliff, and we were working with Palos Verdes Fire Department. So I was in the back pulling up this litter, and as I was pulling up the litter, I was looking at the rotor head, and I was looking at the rotor blades close to the cliff. But the pilots in the Coast Guard are awesome pilots. A lot of guys turned out to be my brothers big time in the Coast Guard, so I really appreciate it. And we got the litter up. We flew over the top of the hill, got to the hospital in Torrance, and the patient was okay. So it turned out to be a really good mission.
Now, what type of aircraft was this? What type of helicopter was this?
This is old school. I call them HH-52H, similar to Sea King in the Navy. So, yeah, twin turbine, very powerful aircraft. No, this one's not twin. This was a single, but very good aircraft. It had pontoons on the side, so if it had to land in the water, it would float. So that was pretty. I had really good times with that.
Now, let's go back for a minute and tell us about flight engineer training. Where was it conducted, and how long was it?
Training was in North Carolina, Elizabeth City. Lasted about if I can remember, maybe 6, 7 months. Basically, structural training, avionics, electrical. In the Coast Guard, since it's a small organization, it's about the same size as the New York Police Department, is what I was told. Basically, a lot of cross training. So I got cross training there at Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And then when I went to my duty station, more cross training. So that's basically how this is going to follow my life, cross training. So I've done cross training in the Coast Guard, being an aviator, flight engineer, avionics, AT work, really in-depth avionics training, electrical training, and structural engineer training. So I got a lot of background experience. In a lot of larger services, it's more towards you probably end up doing a single thing like structural training, and that would be the only thing you would do. But in the Coast Guard, I think now I went back and looked at their webpage. I think they do all cross training right in school. So it happens right in school in your training, as opposed to when you get to your duty station. So everything's done, right with your initial training.
Now, I know what it's like to be a flight engineer on a jet. Like I was a flight engineer on the 727. Can you tell our listeners what it's like, what you do as a flight engineer on the rescue helicopter?
On the rescue helicopter, basically you do the pre-flights and the post-flights like you normally would do with any aircraft. You want to make sure that everything is correct before you step on. They have hydraulics, which is a huge concern with helicopters. So you have to, when you do your pre-checks, you want to make sure they have this. They had this room in this HA-52 called a broom box. It was a box or a little station for the hydraulic station where you would check all your hydraulics, and it was very important that you check the broom box because if the hydraulics went out in the helicopter, that wouldn't be a good thing.
Right. Now, have you ever had any times when there was an aircraft emergency when something went out?
I was very fortunate. I never had an experience like that, but there was a crew. The helicopter did have a failure. I'm not sure. I can't remember what the failure was, but for me, I was very, very fortunate. I never had any failures when I was flying. I mean, the night sun that we would go out with, sometimes I would have issues with that, but that was electrical. That's not a thing. That wasn't a thing I was really too concerned about as far as safety for myself and the pilots. But I was very fortunate, George, not to have any mishaps on any of the missions I went out on.
Now, Greg, you said the night sun. I assume that's a spotlight of some kind?
Yes, sir. That's the spotlight that we used. And we also, our station, Los Angeles, was first to come out with FLIR, the forward-looking infrared radar. So with that, that was a very nice tool to have because at night when we went out, we were only authorized rescue to go out at night missions because of our tools and what we had. So it was really good to be on the forefront of that technology using the flare because at nighttime when you're doing searches, it's really difficult to spot somebody in the water. So with their heat signature in the water, it made it a lot easier to pick up on someone. Plus, they use it for law enforcement also. It was a really good tool for that.
And I understand you participated in some law enforcement activities also?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that.
Well, not getting too much into detail, drug interdiction, basically checking containers, barges, that kind of thing, not to get too much into detail. But that's pretty much what I was using. Our purpose was like interdiction as far as checking, not interdicting as far as going in and stopping somebody doing drugs, that kind of thing. So it was like more watching as opposed to direct contact.
Now, was this before aviators had night vision goggles, or did you have those also?
Yes, sir. It was before. This was like I think it was like they were using this for a test for that. So it was like we were like breaking ground with the flare system. It was some tool to help people out in the water, finding them at nighttime. It's difficult enough trying to spot somebody on the ocean with the white caps and everything, spotting them in the daytime, but at night it's virtually almost impossible. So this tool, picking up heat signatures in the water, that was a beautiful tool.
How many rescues did you go on?
Quite a few. I was the guy that every time we stood duty, I would get at least 2 or 3 calls. Yeah, I would get
Really?
two or three
Now, when
calls.
you say you stood duty, you'd be like a fireman in the station waiting for the alarm to go off. Is that the way it worked?
Yes, sir. And every time, guaranteed, I would get like 2 or 3 calls. And the pilots in rotation said they had this little running joke. The old Poole's got stationed, so we got duty tonight. So I don't know. Let's rotate out because every time this guy's on duty, we get like 3 or 4 calls. So I loved it. I enjoyed it every time we went out. Um, if you want, I can tell you another story, which
Sure.
was okay. This is probably like one of the best stories I really like because I remember when the fishermen that we rescued looked up at me. I would never forget the look that they gave me as we were picking them up on the helicopter. So this one happened at, you get this call like, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, we're close to off duty. So 5 o'clock, we get this call, 2 fishermen out by Channel Islands in California. So we go out there. There's a marine layer that's usually there in the morning, which allows the pilots only maybe 300 feet as far as where they can fly in.
Right.
I think we're like maybe 300 to 400 feet off the deck, and we're flying straight out to this Channel Island to pick up these 2 sailors. And as we're getting there, these 2 sailors were on a piece of foam, and these guys looked up at me, and I could tell that, hey, you know what? I'm glad to see you. I'm glad to see you guys. It was like, wow, we just got there just in the nick of time because the water in California is like 40 degrees, so you could get hypothermia within 5 minutes easy.
Sure.
So we hoisted these 2 guys up, flew them to the Channel Islands base there, and flew back. And that was a mission I'll never forget because I will never forget the look on those guys' faces as we were pulling them up. And we gave them blankets. We got them to the hospital. And it was quick and easy. So it only lasted that whole mission probably 30, 45 minutes.
Uh huh.
So when things go perfect like that, it's like one of those moments that you'll never forget in your life.
Now, when you rescue someone and you bring them into the helicopter, do they hug you? Do they start crying? What's the typical reaction you get?
These 2 sailors were crying like babies. They were so elated that someone was able to come out there and pick them up because I'm not sure if anyone else would have been able to do it in the amount of time that we did it in because 5 minutes, George, in the water, 40 degrees, 30 degrees, you know what could happen with hypothermia. So
Sure.
these guys were on this foam, and as soon as we picked them up, I wrapped blankets around them. They had a big smile on their face. I still have an image of their faces in my mind right now as we speak, and I will never forget that. And we got those guys. We got those guys to that island, and we got it back home, and then everything was successful. Everything went great. Perfect.
Now, have there ever been times when the people you've rescued have come back to visit and meet you after the rescue?
I had a couple. It's been a long time ago, but I had a couple people did come back and they did thank me. It was that was a treat. But the treat is to see the looks on the faces of those 2 sailors as we picked them up out of the water. I will never forget that moment. I think that's like the highlight of my career when I was in the Coast Guard. That moment in time.
Very rewarding. Now, I want to change gears for a minute and ask how you got into martial arts.
Martial arts actually formally started for me in the Coast Guard when I was in training for my aircraft training in the Coast Guard. There was one of the chiefs there. He was into Shotokan, which is Japanese martial arts.
Right, hard style. That's the first style I started. I started in that back in 1979. Excuse me.
Very, very hard style. So there's a funny story, George. I went into this dojo, and I did it for a month. And all we did was knuckle push-ups, jumping jacks, didn't learn any martial arts. And for me at that age, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So I stopped after a month. Was a white belt, and I stopped. And I was like, I'm not sure if this is the right thing for me. And then when I got to my duty station, I met one of my crewmates. He was Filipino. So he introduced me into Filipino martial arts, Arnis, Filipino martial arts. So I got started actually non-formal martial arts training when I was in the Coast Guard with my crewmate. So we trained Filipino style, and we did a little bit of Kali, which is stick work, and I boxing and did a little weight training with him. So from there, I did that for a while, Filipino martial arts, and then let's see, in the 90s, I decided I wanted to be an instructor to teach other students. So I met another guy who did Aikido, and he was fourth dan in Aikido. So he said, you know, Greg, you have to get a belt, because really, if to be recognized by someone, you know, I know you did a lot of non-formal training, but to get to a point where you want to train other students, you need to have something formal, some kind of, you know, like a degree. So I started in Taekwondo. I did that. And George, I tell you, it just progressed from Taekwondo to Hapkido to, you know, going to tournaments, that kind of thing. Kept doing my Kali training, my Filipino training with that. And it was just kind of like a progression, because I noticed that when I was, you know, doing my sparring, my fighting, I would watch other systems, and I would always want to win. So for me to say, which system is best for me to win if I ever have to, you know, say outside of the dojo or dojang, what system would I need to use in order to win? So that's what kind of got me is going towards these other systems, Salat, a little bit of Muay Thai, what else? Chennai. A lot of people are not aware of that one. I thought, okay, Chennai might be the answer, because not too many people know about wrist locks. But I just at Jet Kundo. So finally, everything progressed to like Jet Kundo style. So with the groundwork, I never did any groundwork until I got to Jet Kundo. I remember I went to this one dojo, and they did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there. And I was like, oh my goodness, I know all these systems. I have all these systems behind me. And I went on this mat with this black belt, second degree, and he knew Jiu-Jitsu. And he wiped the floor with me, and I was like a fish out of water.
Really?
Yeah, he wiped the floor with me, and I was like a second degree, and I was like, wow, this guy is killing me. I did wrestling when I was younger, like freestyle Greco-Roman wrestling.
Uh-huh.
But it was a whole different ball game when he got me on the floor with Jiu-Jitsu. And I told myself that day, I was like, I'm going to learn groundwork, because you can do as much stand-up as you can know as much stand-up as you want, but if you don't have any groundwork and somebody gets you on the ground, that's a whole new ball game. So that's where I started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I started getting more into Jet Kundo then, because Jet Kundo has more like Wing Chun style. It has a lot. I mean, and it's also flow. So I've learned also that, you know, in a fighting situation. And I also train kids now, which teach me flow, because when you try to prepare a plan for kids, when you're training kids, it doesn't quite work out. So what you have to do is you have to kind of bend the rules a little bit and flow with the kids when you're training them. So that kind of taught that, and Jet Kundo is kind of teaching me that it's a progression. You have to flow with the situation. Everything's fluid. I mean, you have a plan, but, you know, things are fluid sometimes, and you have to sometimes you have to improvise, which is what Bruce Lee, the whole water concept and everything has taught me with martial arts is you gotta have fun with it. You gotta flow. And if you get too locked in, then what happens is you lose your motor skills, your fine motor skills. So I've learned that through, you know, training kids, believe it or not, and doing Jet Kundo and all these other martial arts, that just sit back and let it flow and just watch which direction it's going to go into and go with it. These martial arts that are linear, circular, all these martial arts styles that go that way, I mean, they work, but you still have to flow with the pattern and energy of the fight or the whatever it may be.
Uh-huh. Now, if you had to use it on the street, do you have to decide, this is a Jeet Kune Do moment, or this is a Taekwondo moment, or do you just improvise, or what would happen? And have you ever had to use it?
Well, my first master that trained me was 8th degree. George, I'll tell you this little story. He told me that he never used martial arts, and all the way up to 8th degree. And I looked at him and I was like, wow, because I was like a collar belt. I was like, what kind of master are you? You never had to use your martial arts on the street? And that taught me that day that if you can't, like Sun Tzu says, win the battle without mentally, and you have to go to using your hands, then you've failed with the mental part of the aspect of the martial arts, which for me is like, if I can avoid the fight, which I've done successfully for a long time, mentally, awareness, using, I don't want to say Jedi mind tricks, but using whatever I need, positioning, whatever I need to do to make sure I do not, because you have to look out for other things. Say if you get in a physical altercation with someone, you have to worry about the other aspects of, say, the word revenge, because basically nobody likes to get beat up. So they're going to think of a way to get back at you beating them up or whatever you did to them, one way or another. So I don't want to have to deal with that. So mentally, if I can prepare myself not to have to deal with that situation, placement, awareness, positioning, all those tools that I have, then I don't have to use my I train though, just in case I would get in those type of scenarios. But I out in the street, I never had to, because I would use certain mental things to prevent people to want to go to the physical aspect of it.
That's great. That is terrific. I remember reading, I think it was Shoshin Nagamine said the ultimate goal of karate is development of character. And you don't, if you're really good, you don't need to use it in a physical confrontation.
Yes, sir.
So now, go ahead.
Sorry, sir. Go ahead.
As we wrap up, what advice do you have for someone who's just starting out in aviation, like if they want to be a flight engineer?
My advice is to, didn't come easy to me. I had to work hard for it. So I would say to that person, if you're persistent and you really have a passion for it, work as hard as you can, do anything possible to make it. Because it took me a while to get through my qualifications to become a flight engineer. There's steps you have to follow, as far as rescuing, as far as what would happen, and like you were asking about certain scenarios if they came up. Like we would do tail rotor failures, we would do auto rotations. What would you do in those kind of situations? You always have to make sure, like, I hate to say this not hate to say this, it's the word that they use in the Coast Guard is semper paratus, always ready. So you always have to make sure that you're always ready, even in every situation you go into. Always ready. Have that mindset that whatever happens, that you're always ready and you're prepared and you're persistent and you do the work and you'll make it. I mean, as long as you work hard, you're persistent, you have a desire for it, a passion for it, you'll do it. And I've been fortunate enough to do that, come out of the Coast Guard, train 20 some odd years of martial arts, multi-system. I have a lot of students. I don't want to number the amount, but I'm in Florida. I have a lot of students. I've been fortunate enough to train a lot of people. So if you're persistent, you have a good mindset, good attitude, you can do whatever you want to do.
Excellent. Now, is there anything on your aviation bucket list?
SR-71 Blackbird.
Good luck with that, Greg.
No, I know this is way out there. I would I've helicopters is the most for me. So I know jets people would probably say a lot of things about jets, but I don't know. It's too much G forces for me. But I'll stick with the helos. I like the helos. I had a great time with them, especially when I was doing auto rotation failures with the pilots. When I was doing those, George, I couldn't believe that I'm doing this and getting paid too. I used to love auto rotation drills.
Uh-huh.
I remember a lot of guys would come in and have to practice that to qualify for pilots. A lot of guys came in, and when they're senior pilots, they would look back at me and go, "Greg, we got this new guy that we have to, qualify for auto rotations." We both kind of look at each other. We do auto rotations, 360s, straight in, everything. And I loved it. And I was like, wow, this is like a free Disney ride or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I loved it. I had an excellent time, George. It was a beautiful time for me. And I hope that everybody that would go into aviation would have the same experience I did.
That's great. Well, Greg, I know you have a busy schedule. And but one last thing. What languages are you studying?
Right now, currently, I'm studying French and I have Spanish. I'm doing a little bit of. I don't know a little bit of a few, but someone told me that you can't do too many at one time because they all mix in together. So I'm trying to concentrate right now on Spanish and French.
That's really neat. You're keeping your mind active. That's great. It's been so great having you with us today, Greg. Thank you so much. But most importantly, thank you for your service in the Coast Guard.
Thank you, sir. Thank you as well for your service, and thank you for having me on today.
You're welcome.
Thanks again for listening. Subscribe now to the Ready for Takeoff podcast on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, and please rate us and post a review on the iTunes Store. For show notes, resources, and more, head over to readyfortakeoffpodcast.com.